Hello everyone, as we give you a couple of minutes to make your way into our virtual room. And a really timely and relevant discussion for our little community today. We're going to be talking about social capital and community building with my good friend Andrew Leigh, who's just released yet another book. Andrew doesn't mind putting pen to paper. This one's called Reconnected, a community builder's handbook. It's a follow-up to Disconnected that he put out, I think, a decade ago now, Andrew. So we're going to be talking to Andrew. We're also going to be talking to Juliette Wright, whose project GIVIT is one of the case studies in Andrew's book. Before we bring these guys into the discussion, I will just pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we are all meeting. I'm on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present, emerging, and recognise the land that we're all on was never ceded. We've got about 100 in the room. We had 200 RSVPs. I'm really hoping that we have a really active debate because you guys are like the community that I feel like I've been building over the last 9 months, and there's so many familiar faces and it's great to see you all. So please, if you're new, turn your camera on, use the chat, tell us where you're from. As the discussion unfolds, you know, this is going to be one where I want to have a lot of you asking Andrew and Juliette questions and not just listening to us, because, you know, I think if there's one thing that I've learned along the way, that community occurs when people are in a discussion, not just watching it. So on that note, Andrew, let's talk about social capital, because it's one of those terms that kind of is out there, and I think it's a term of art, it's an economic term, and it's also a term that people use in day-to-day conversation. But I'm interested in terms of anchoring your book, what you mean by it, and also, I guess, how you've observed the bank of social capital either going up or going down over the last little period.
Well, thanks very much, Peter. Real honour to be joining you for this conversation and to have the fabulous Juliette Wright on the call as well. Can I too acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose lands I'm speaking to you today. Dara Nuna, Dara Ngunnawal, Yongu, Nalamanyan, Dunimanyan, Ngunnawal Wari, Dara Wari, Dindi, Wangaralin Jinyin. And pay tribute to any Indigenous people on the conversation today. Peter, the idea of social capital comes out of the trichotomy that economists have. We've got our physical capital, stuff that will break your foot if you drop it on. It might be your tools or your house or your bridges. Then you've got human capital, that's the knowledge and skills you've got, the know-how. And then you've got human capital, which is the idea that the ties that bind us together have inherent value. Economists notice this all over the place. In communities where there's a lot of trust, business flows better because people can do deals on a handshake rather than needing to write everything down as you do in a low trust community. But of course, that's not the main reason we care about social capital. The main reason we care about social capital is that a life lived together is a better life. Aristotle even thought that community preceded the individual. And we all know from our own lives that friendships are fundamental to enjoying a good life. And yet, in Australia, many indicators of community have waned. Nick, Terrell and I go through some of the evidence there. Since the mid-1980s, Australians have halved the number of friends we have. We know half as many neighbours. We've lost 2/3 of the churchgoers since the 1950s, 2/3 of union members since the 1980s. Australians are less likely to join associations, and there's less associations to join. We've become less likely to volunteer, to donate, and all of these metrics seem to, if anything, accelerated in their decline. But Reconnected isn't just about tracking the problems, it's also about identifying the solutions. We need to be honest about the challenges that we face in Australia. We need to avoid a kind of false nostalgia or a kind of back to the 1950s approach. And we need to find smart ways of building connections in a world that is much more technological advanced and much busier than past eras.
Right. So Juliette, welcome. I guess if Andrew's identified social capital. You're a social capitalist.
Yes.
So give us a short version of your project and how it came into being and what you've learnt along the journey.
So about 11 years ago, I had a baby boy who was very, very fat, unfortunately. And all of my clothes that I had got given for him, he wouldn't fit. So I tried to donate them to someone locally and through all the local charities, and none of them wanted the clothes. So I asked them what they did need, and I found the answer always completely kooky and surprising. So I started an organisation called GIVIT, GIVIT. And I kind of built it in faith, thinking that people would want to give stuff that they have around the house, like really good quality items they have around the house, like microwaves, cutlery, closed-toe work boots, and directly give it to someone in urgent need. And a charity would make that request on behalf of the family or the individual. Anyway, so I started in January 2010, and within weeks I was working full-time. I was really surprised and overwhelmed how many people wanted to give directly to someone who they'd never met, to someone in urgent need. It was like I was sitting on a rocket, Peter, and the rocket was giving. Everybody wanted to give directly to someone in need, and I was blown away by, and I have been now, I've done maybe 15 natural disasters. We've done close to 2 million donations now. And I can vouch that Australians are incredibly generous people. But unfortunately, there's an increase in need all the time. There is still impoverished, marginalised and vulnerable people in Australia, and even more so now with people experiencing financial distress because of COVID. And so we have waves of need that come through, and then we have waves of generosity that come through. So with GIVIT, I kind of have to manage the waves.
And is your model that you basically, you draw an inventory that's required and then put a call out to your community, or is it a push-pull sort of setup?
Yeah, there's a catalogue of donation offers from the community, and there's a catalogue of donation needs requested by charities. So it's kind of a digital data place for donations, like Gumtree, without the money or the auction. So charities can go on, put their postcode in and see what's available in their local area. But if they can't find it, they'll request an item, and then you can go on the website, put in your postcode and see what's needed in your local area. But just say there's no pram on the list, you can pledge a pram. So we also actually accept cash donations, because sometimes we want to buy those items, because I've actually discovered in the last 10 years that donations can actually do great harm as well. So for example, if we were to bring in, I've seen a news agency owner cry when people have brought in news agents, stationery packs for kids affected by drought. And they said, I'm going to close the doors. I can't afford to function now. And so what we do is we buy items locally. So we never do any harm. So we've come a long way in the last 10 years.
Andrew, I guess the fact that you've highlighted Juliette's work shows there is a demand for people to step up and fill gaps, and when people do, other people follow. Is Juliette's a typical story, or is she an outlier?
Juliette's definitely an outlier, and her story is an extraordinary one, but she's not alone in terms of being a great social capitalist, as you so aptly put it there, Peter. One of the reasons we profile Juliette is because we think that technology can be a double-edged sword. More Australians say they're addicted to smartphones than say they are addicted to smoking. We have an upsurge in mental health problems among young Australians that's coincided with the rise of the smartphone, Facebook and Twitter. And many of us feel that we're too enthralled with our devices. But Nick, Terrell and I talk about this notion of cyber connecting, the idea that we don't just want to use our devices mindfully, but also that there's all kinds of clever ways in which technology can make us a more connected community. One of the things we love about GIVIT is that it takes away that intermediate step, the dusty warehouse where donations sit, and allows donations to go directly from the donor to the needy recipient with a really high quality match. It's something that just wouldn't have been possible a generation ago before the technology came in place.
And we admire Juliette too, because she does something that many of the other successful entrepreneurs we identify in Reconnected do, which is to define the limits around what she's going to do and to say, we don't do that, we don't do this, but we're going to focus on what we do really well. We think that's a real success that shines out of many of the great social entrepreneurs we profile.
Part of me thinks there's a failure in social policy that people need to fill the gap. Should I be looking at it as a deficit, or that we're reinventing and picking up pieces that we shouldn't have to?
Partly it is filling in gaps that shouldn't be there. You know, people often say, oh, if only philanthropy in Australia was as strong as it is in the United States, to which progressives respond, well, philanthropy is what it is in the US, in part because the social safety net has so many holes in it. So you certainly wouldn't want to get your upsurge in community by going to the threadbare welfare state that America has. But in other areas, there really is activities being brought on by individuals that couldn't be done by government. I think about Catherine Barrett's Kindness Pandemic Facebook page, which exploded in popularity when COVID struck. That got 500,000 users because people wanted a chance to share some of the extraordinary civic stories that were taking place amidst the COVID shutdown. The person who saw the woman in front of him at a supermarket had forgotten her credit card, just stepped up and said, I'll pay for your groceries. The people on street corners who changed those little free lending libraries into places where you could pick up a roll of toilet paper if you'd sold out the local supermarket. And then also using the Kindness Pandemic Facebook page to mobilise support, for example, for women whose antenatal classes had been cancelled. So there's terrific work being done that simply couldn't be done by government, Peter.
Juliette, have you noticed a difference in tone since the beginning of this year? You're a decade into your project. Has the moment that Andrew talks about this idea that when we went through this amazing and scary and disruptive experience, it actually brought out a better part of ourselves?
Yes. I truly believe, though, this year that people already had a bit of fatigue coming out of the bushfires. So it was actually a little bit more difficult than I want to admit to actually get the items that we required for those affected by COVID. So, for example, we had an extraordinary number of requests for laptops, screens, smartphones for grandmothers who couldn't FaceTime their families, and data. And a lot more people weren't in a position to actually give that. They needed those spare devices that they'd never used. So there was this deficit, but also we didn't receive much cash donations for this appeal. Like we received $2 million for the bushfires or $4 million for the Townsville floods. But in the COVID appeal, I think we might have got $20,000. So it's not saying that people aren't generous, but the amount that they were giving was less. And, but it was still giving. And, you know, it was microwaves and stationery supplies, and office people put together stuff and they put together stationery packs for mums at home. So the generosity was still there, but some of those peak need items, we had to go out and physically raise money to purchase those items for those people because the community couldn't meet their need.
I think some of the interesting giving has actually been in time. There's been examples, I think, in your book, Andrew, of phone trees, people reaching out to vulnerable people that were isolated. And this idea that, yes, we can give money, yes, we can give items, but we can also give time, and our concern and regard to people is kind of a new conversation that speaks to that different sense of value that is that social capital narrative.
Absolutely. Robert Putnam's got a new book out called The Upswing, in which he ties together the rise in inequality in America and the rise in disconnection. And one of the points that he makes is that raising kids well needs to be something that everyone takes an investment in. And he contrasts the stories that he felt in his childhood home in Ohio in the 1950s with the much more balkanised Ohio of today, in which parents don't see themselves as having an active need to help out with the parenting in other of more vulnerable kids in the communities. And that's, again, something which is an important feature of strong societies, that you raise kids in, to use the old cliche, a village, rather than having everyone in their individual households. And I do think there's a strong connection in Australia as well. I don't think it's a coincidence that the past generation has seen the gap between rich and poor widen at the very same time as we've seen a steep drop-off in the share of us who are actively involved in neighbourhood organisations.
Yeah, you know, that whole currency of time becomes really powerful. And if there's a few comments in the chat, and we'll be calling some people up soon, but one of the things I've noticed is with the lockdown and the need not to commute, people have actually got a little bit more time, and thinking about how that time's going to be spent has been interesting. One of the things we've been spending our time on, you know, in our lunch times has been these sorts of discussions, and coming up with a suite of options of civic engagement seems a really interesting response to these changed circumstances as well. Before we move on, Juliette, there's a few people in the chat very concerned just to understand what the GIVIT model is and very worried you're doing all this for nothing and how on earth you're surviving. Do you want to just give a little bit more detail about the GIVIT model?
So GIVIT's funded by lovely corporates, like, for example, Haynes, who do Burley Bras and Bonds and Sheridan, and they give us stock. They give us their slobs, their slow and obsolete stock, which is lovely, and we distribute that all across Australia, but they also give us funds as well. So that kind of supports our national operations and having few admin staff and things like that, but we're funded by government, because our disaster recovery service is a fee-for-service. And so we work in partnership with the Queensland Government, New South Wales, Victoria. We work in the ACT to manage all offers of goods and services in times of disasters and emergencies and pandemics and crisis, which seems to be continuously unfolding in Australia at the moment. We used to be, you know, activated for a disaster, you know, once or twice a year, and now it's just a rolling, continuous, sad state of affairs. We need to, thank God we're a generous country, I say.
Hey, we've got Dean, who had a really useful contribution. Are you there, Dean?
Yep, I'm here. You can hear me, I'm assuming.
Yeah, hi.
I think during the COVID kind of period, like I spent a lot of time at home working and stuff. And what I noticed was not so much, I think the generosity of the community shifted from being cash to being engagement in the sense local. Like I would walk down to my local shops with my dog and buy a coffee, and the local coffee place thrived because of it, and community started building in our local shop. So in the ACT we have like shops for the suburbs, and then we've got the really big malls and shopping centres. I think a lot of the economy shifted more locally and started supporting, and people, the proximity aspect of life, people kept on bumping into people. I met more people in the last 6 months, I suppose, since I've been here 10 years in this house. In the last 6 months, I've met more people than I've met previously. And being a male as well, with children, I was working somewhere else. My wife was with the kids and the family, but now I'm meeting all the school community. So although there are a few other dynamics around that, that's interesting, but I think the social capital, COVID has demonstrated that we do need to shift the way we think about how the economy works for us in that sense. So I'm much more enamored to government actually not backing out of the world. Like currently, I think the federal government's budget tends towards putting all the load on business to recover. But I think government's got to be a lot more active in it, particularly as it supports communities and service groups and the like. So I don't see the ongoing competition and funding cuts and has not been healthy for society and the social capital. And I think the Commonwealth in particular needs to put more effort into actually strategically nurturing local, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Andrew, it feels like we're not going to be going back to the old way anytime soon, but there's a huge opportunity for local community there, doesn't it?
Sure is, Peter. And I think Dean's comment really highlights the question as to whether we can grab this moment and make something of it to turn around the long run trends, which have been occurring since the 1960s. So it's a big thing to turn around. The two examples I think about are World War II, which led to a lasting upsurge in civic engagement, what people sometimes call the greatest generation, and September 11 in the US, which led to a temporary uptick in solidarity that then immediately ebbed away. And we need to make sure that this brings about lasting change. I think there's conversations such as this and the way in which you've used this opportunity to bring diverse people, groups of people together to discuss big ideas is one potentially positive upside. Some of the local community support groups are also now looking at how they can move into dealing not just with COVID, but also to deal with local environmental issues. And so if we're able to mobilise out of this, that will be terrific. Nick and I in Reconnected talk about the notion of Sutton's law of social capital. We named this after Willie Sutton, the bank robber, who, when asked why he robbed banks, said, well, that's because that's where the money is. So we think that if you're going to build social capital, you need to do it where the need is. And that will mean for some people who are in better off parts of Australia looking to reach out to more vulnerable, underserved communities. And we have a plethora of examples in Reconnected of where people have done that. Community gardens around public housing projects, engagement of soccer clubs with refugee youth. There's all kinds of community entrepreneurs that are putting Sutton's law of social capital into place.
Yeah, Juliette, any reflections?
I confess I was just talking to Ken on the messenger there.
Oh, that's all right. Ken's going to be your next big donor, I reckon. Well, I'll call Suzanne. Suzanne's got a comment and we might pull you in after that. Hi, Susan.
Hi, I've just got two comments. One, I'm in the Blue Mountains, so we had a pretty shocking time, like many parts of Victoria and New South Wales in the fires in January. And we had, so there's locally developed, locally mobilised action, no matter how tiny it is. For example, we asked our fire brigades what they needed, and they said hot meals when we come in each day. So we ran rosters all through January, believe it or not, making lasagna and delivering it to the fire brigades. And that was following an initiative that our local state member had started in the 2012 fires, who lives around the corner from me. And our local federal member, Susan Templeman, which is what I put in the comment box, was initiated. She used the databases that already exist of voters and put them to a new purpose by asking for volunteers to make phone calls. So it's sort of a phone tree to check in on those people who were solo and over 70. And we ran for about 6 weeks, just phoning up these people all around all parts of the electorate. And I just want to say, the point I want to make is charity is only really powerful when we recognise the reciprocity of it. It's as advantageous in community building for the person who makes the lasagna as the person and joins up with their neighbours to do it in the one with the biggest kitchen and the biggest pots as the fireys who come in covered in ash. And likewise, phoning up somebody who has a chat when they're really frightened, it's as advantageous and important for the person who's on the other end of the call.
Yeah, I was going to ask what you got out of being part of that, because that is part of the thing, isn't it?
Well, I guess what I got out of it, I'm living alone, working from home, for a much longer period than any of us anticipated. And, recognising we're all lonely. People in houses full of people are lonely now too, because there are other people they can't see overseas, in other states, in other cities. We're all worried about people somewhere. So, like the initial feeling, tamp it down, but actually acknowledging the complexity of the emotional landscapes that people are in everywhere. It has to be a healthy response, I think.
Comments? Or also, like, it's a beautiful contribution. Thank you, Susanne. I think everyone's nodding, but
sorry, Peter. I was just going to say, Susanne, your example of Susan Templeman's phone trees is just one of the creative ways that people have stepped in order to mobilise that latent community support during 2020. One of the others that I really admire is Craig Foster's Play for Lives. Craig recognised that there had been a whole lot of sporting competitions shut down and then asked sporting people to step in and volunteer. We know that 2/3 of volunteers said they had to cut back on their volunteering activity when COVID hit, in large part because there's many older volunteers for whom it simply wasn't safe to continue to volunteer. So Play for Lives asked sports people to step onto a new field, the field of volunteering. And Craig was there looking not only for a temporary resurgence, but also for something more lasting. He's long been troubled by the fact that a lot of professional sporting teams have become too distant from the communities that they serve and represent, and he wanted to reset that relationship. So he's using all of these sporting structures to try and ensure that sporting stars are better connected to their local community. And again, that's about making sure that this moment is more like the years following World War II than the years following September 11.
Susanne, I also love your examples of the volunteering because they were actually meeting real and urgent local need. So you knew you were participating in something that was actually having impact. It gave you that feeling, a sense of connection to your community, and also made people who were receiving the food and the calls a sense that they were supported by their community. So that's my favourite type of social capitalism, and that is addictive. That feeling of being connected to your community, I think once people tap into that, I think that they'll stick with it and they'll seek out opportunities to continue doing that.
I don't think I just want to say one more thing. I don't think these are exceptional. You know, they're not case studies of the exceptional practices. There's tiny little movements everywhere in the country, I believe, in every small town, like where my parents live in Victoria, of people just in very small ways looking out for each other. So I don't know how we elevate the observation of recognition of that, but we need to see it.
Thanks, Susanne. And I can hear your cicadas as well. I feel very much, I wish I was up there with you. David Bailey had an interesting comment. Are you there, Do?
Yes, I am.
Hi.
Hi. I work with a number of charities. I've met Andrew a few times through Results in Canberra. But I run a not-for-profit in Canberra which trains people how to massage people in frail health. And the thing that I wanted to talk about is that increasingly, as an older person, I'm being asked to be really swish and effective on new technologies to try and earn grants. And I've always had this problem that maybe it's the person who writes the best grant proposal who gets the money, or that seems to be the case, but it doesn't necessarily reflect that the organisation that wins the grant is delivering the best bang for buck to the community. So that's just a comment I'd like to make. So perhaps in terms of philanthropic organisations or government grants, it may be, what do we need to do to allow people who aren't tech savvy to get access to funds?
If only we had a legislator in the room. Oh, Andrew.
David, we've got a chunk of Reconnected, which is devoted to donations and how organisations are going about seeking philanthropic support. One of the things we talk about there is the issue of evidence and the effective altruism movement, which is increasingly asking charities not simply to make feel-good appeals, but actually to provide real evidence as to how they've made a difference. It's not good enough to say, we stepped in and we helped people and a year later those people were better off. You can't be sure whether they would have been better off in the absence of your help. So as a passionate devotee of randomised trials, I'm always delighted to see charities doing randomised trials, but that doesn't have to be the only way in which you show impact. There's a range of different ways in which charities can show real impact. And I think moving philanthropists down the road towards altruism that does the most good in the community is really important. I'm also really pleased when I see large foundations stepping into areas where perhaps there's a little bit more at risk, where they're funding people who are doing innovative things that might fail, and ideally funding things that government wouldn't be in a position to fund. That's philanthropy, which is recognising the comparative advantage of donors in allowing us to push the envelope on how to be a fairer and more connected society, and recognising their unique role. And of course, I'm sure you know in your own experience, we add the notion of enthusiasm there. One of my favourite thinkers, Kevin Kelly, reckons that enthusiasm is worth at least 25 IQ points. So we reckon that enthusiasm goes a long way, particularly if you're seeking grants.
Andrew, one of the things that I guess confuses me or concerns me is the intersection of volunteerism with economic triggers. So David's just been talking about funding models. At times I've thought, why don't we provide tax concessions to people who volunteer, but then are they still volunteers? It gets really confusing, doesn't it? In that mixture of giving, but also in a world where everything's rewarded economically, finding some sort of economic recognition for it. Now, it's great that Juliette's received funding to do what she does, but is there a better way of thinking of this as a duality between volunteering and doing stuff for money?
Yes, it's important that we ensure that volunteers aren't left out of pocket. And one of the things that we saw during the bushfires was that prior to this last summer's bushfires, there'd been a steady decline in the number of volunteer firefighters per Australian. We're about 14,000 volunteer firefighters short of where we'd been a decade ago. And that meant those people were just massively overstretched and were having to dip into their own pockets in order to fight fires on behalf of all of us. We need to make sure that isn't happening, but we also need to protect the notion that volunteering is fundamentally about giving something up in order to live a better life. There is a notion of the helper's high, where there's plenty of science around the notion that helping others is good for you. Indeed, we know that those who are asked to help are often much better off themselves. One lovely experiment randomly assigned people a fixed sum of money, and they could either go out and spend it on themselves, or they could go out and spend it on others. The group randomly assigned to go out and spend the money on others was happier and more satisfied at the end of the day than the group who were told to go out and spend the money on themselves.
Juliette?
I wanted to go back to David. Oh, David, don't think that I haven't got a failed grant in my inbox every week. It's grueling and it's brutal how competitive the not-for-profit space is. And GIVIT's problem is that we're a charity for charities. So we're not a direct service provider like yourselves. But my advice is to grab a volunteer who is tech savvy, get them to register on GIVIT, and then start requesting all the massage oils, massage beds, pillows, towels, whatever it is that you need that you spend money on. We can actually provide that for you. and then reach out to me via GIVIT, and I'll proofread a grant application, and mate, I will add some words in there that will make you cry, and whoever reads the grant will go, we have to fund you. I think the people who read the grants aren't all just left brain people, they're right brain people who really care. So add lots of caring words in.
I'm going to call up Lily Spencer now, who had a great comment/question on the UBI, which Andrew does touch upon in his book.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew, I was just curious to hear more of your thoughts on this, because maybe it's not the silver bullet, but it does seem like a policy like that would help to address a structural issue, which is, I live in Sydney. I have 2 little kids. I work part-time. My husband works full-time. We earn a good wage, and we can't afford a house as it is. Like, work under this neoliberal-esque model that we have, it just cannibalizes our time and energy for so much else that we could be doing, resting and playing and giving and helping and building this beautiful social capital and connection that we're all yearning for. So it just seems to me like if we could give people a better basic income, that would free us up to use our energy and our time more intentionally and less to just try to keep up and get by.
Lily, I certainly admire where many of the advocates of a universal basic income are coming from, the idea that we need a strong social safety net. But as somebody who's on a 6-figure income, my view is don't give me welfare. I don't want a welfare payment, particularly given that I know that to do that would mean taking money away from those who need it more than me. So if we took our existing social safety net and we turned it into a universal basic income, we'd be looking at destroying the National Disability Insurance Scheme, halving the amount of money that goes to pensioners, reducing unemployment benefits, so unemployment benefits would go down rather than up. That's what we need to do in order to get flat payments across society. Or else, alternatively, if you wanted to have a universal basic income that sat, say, at the level of the age pension, hardly luxurious, but that's something some people have suggested, then you'd need to go to higher levels of tax rates than any country in the world currently has, which I think would be probably anathema to many people. Australia actually has the welfare system that is furthest away from the universal basic income. We've traditionally tried to target payments to those who need them the most. Our welfare system is an extremely targeted one. Universal basic income is exactly the opposite. It's saying, let's do away with targeting. Let's not give money to the neediest, but let's cut the same check to the homeless person as to Jamie Packer. Jamie Packer, lovely bloke, see him on TV from time to time talking about his business dealings, but I don't think he needs a check from the government. So then the question is how we manage to free up that time and those opportunities. And I think it will be increasingly a cascade. As people see others volunteering in their community, they'll want to step up and do the same. And this isn't just a pipe dream. We've seen this before. We've seen periods in Australian history in which people have increased the rate at which they're volunteering. And it need not be the case that we have decreasing civic engagement along with economic growth. In fact, we can have strong economic growth and stronger civic engagement if we set our minds to it.
I might have actually sold you a pup then. I don't think you did write about UBI in this book. I'm reading Parallel Evil Geniuses by Kurt Anderson, who goes deep into it in the context of a world where there's not going to be enough jobs for everyone. So maybe Lily...
I wrote about it in my last book. That's all right.
That's all right. Hey, on that, I'm going to bring Daney Faddoul in. Hi, Daney. I'm sort of bouncing a little bit off what Lily's just been talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks so much for the contributions. I wanted to ask a question about time poverty. What could be done to actually deal with the issue of time poverty to improve civic engagement and provide more time for people to be involved in social capital? To give you an example, we've got like some of the worst levels of unpaid overtime in the developed world, and we don't have the sort of services like early childhood learning being properly funded that would provide the sort of services to support people being able to devote time to civic engagement and social capital. So I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts would be about dealing with time poverty.
Danny, I think it's a great question, and it's one that you've been thinking about a lot, particularly in the context of employee rights. Traditionally, when people have talked about workplace flexibility, they don't mean the flexibility to go and pick up your kids in the afternoon. They mean the flexibility for the employer to roster you on at times that are inconvenient to the worker. But yet, I think COVID is changing that pretty fast. It's teaching us that a lot of firms are able to provide more flexibility to their employees than they would have thought was possible a year ago. We're still working out some of the details around this. Onboarding new staff is more challenging in a Zoom environment, and managing staff remotely tests the quality of managers. A good manager is able to observe people's outputs and doesn't have to worry about their physical body being in the physical office. A bad manager is managing their inputs, and they need to be able to keep workers under their watchful eye at all times. But we'll get good managers, and increasingly, I think many jobs are going to move to a semi-working from home environment. I was talking to a mate the other day who thinks that many people in his team, which is an investment bank in Sydney, are going to be working Tuesday to Thursday in the office, Monday and Friday at home. And that provides not only the flexibility for childcare, but also the flexibility to engage with a hobby, to go and visit an ageing relative in an aged care home when that all becomes possible, or to just enjoy spending time with friends. So my hope is that that's actually one of the things that we do get right as a result of COVID, but it'll need to be an active choice. Now, I think it will be an easier move if we're also able to see more workplace organisations stepping up. We have seen an increase in the union membership rate in the past. There's no reason union membership needs to fall down, and we talk in Reconnected about organisations such as the Young Workers Centre and Hospo Voice, which have been really important in trying to level up the balance between employers and employees and get back some of that true flexibility that you and I care a lot about.
Yeah, I think the issue of work is really interesting. I think the other element that's really needs to be understood is that working from home is actually more intensive. You don't walk from one end of the city to the other. There aren't those water coolers. So to recognise, I think if we stick with this mixture of working from home and face to face, particularly in those lucky enough to work in knowledge economy jobs, that the idea of 8 hours doing something like this is just not sustainable. That shorter, sharper work that's productive, giving people time to be involved in the P&C and be involved in the local sports club could create, really interesting and useful waves moving out. Now, that's for a very privileged cohort of the workforce. I don't think it's good enough just to say life can be awesome for some of us. We're talking about a K-shaped recovery. So back to your Sutton's Law, we've also got to look for those that are looking for work, and also those that are working in more physical place-based work. But to stop, I guess, thinking about it as a duality and an industrial model where you pack up and go somewhere and then you come back and you have less and less time to do it. So, what I love about Reconnected is it's just the start of that conversation. And I think a lot of this is going to be worked out in real time. I know, Juliette, one of the things that Andrea speaks about in the book is the degree to which the intensity of what you do does lead to the burnout and not having to do it as an individual and having other people working with you as well. So there's lots of challenges there, aren't there?
Mm. We've definitely noticed a movement since working from home that people are more effective and efficient when they're not interrupted all the time. So I hope that, and as we see in the book, Nick and Andrew talk about, that when people get that sense of feeling connected, they have a little bit more time, they'll actually realise how wonderful it is to be so connected. And it's, can I just say, and I haven't said, I'm just so honoured to be in the book. Oh my God, what a treat.
Yes, being in an Andrew Leigh book is a moment in many people's life.
Can I just mention one other thing related to time poverty there, Peter? And that's that there's many community entrepreneurs who are looking at how their organisation can serve two purposes at the same time. Nick, Terrell and I talk and Reconnected about Greening Australia's singles tree planting events, in which you can improve the environment and potentially meet the love of your life at the same time. We talk about the Good Gym in the UK, in which people volunteer to go for a run on a Saturday morning to the home of someone who's feeling a bit isolated. The isolated older person is referred to as a coach because they're the person that gets the runner out of bed in order to go and have a cuppa and then jog back home. And we repurpose George Orwell's phrase, double plus good, to not be a form of newspeak, but actually to be our tag phrase for community entrepreneurs that are creating things that serve two purposes. So double plus good social capital can be a solution to those who are feeling more time pressed. Get your exercise at the same time as you're building community. Also, Juliette's been kind of coy about her organisation. Anyone who wants to check it out can go to givit.org.au. And that's immediately a place where today you can take the dusty microwave that's in the spare room, put it on there and make sure that it goes to someone that really needs it.
Right. I'm going to call Millie Rooney up now from Australia reMADE. Hi, Millie.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just really interested in a few things here. And one of them is when we talk about social capital, you know, when we talk about financial capital, it's very easy to measure and, you know, exchange. I'm interested in the way that we can think about social capital when things are really immeasurable, and how we think about value and people's contributions that we cannot measure, or when we actually measure, they become less valuable. So thinking about my community here, I'm the household that people come and, you know, they're often in tears at the door, or Millie, can you help me work through this problem? The instant I, you know, said, thanks, that's $50, you know, we've had that conversation, it loses the magic of that immeasurable transaction. Similarly, my husband has a chronic illness, he can't work. So his contribution is, again, to our society and our community, immeasurable and untradeable. So I guess, how do we think about contributions that are not directly tradable, which is where I think some of this universal stuff comes in. You can't, you know, I often think in an apocalypse, what am I going to trade? I can't build, I can't really cook, I can't really grow things, but I can think and I can lead. But they're not exchangeable on a website. So how do we think about supporting people who contribute in immeasurable ways? Andrew?
Millie, I firstly thank you for the important work that you do, and something that I'm sure we as a community don't appreciate enough. One of the ways in which people sometimes talk about doing this is by what I call dollarizing it. So they'll come along with a consultant's report that has effectively put some dollar figure on the helping that's going on. I always feel like that cheapens things rather than strengthening them. As an economist, I'm well aware that the purpose of our discipline is about maximising happiness or well-being or utility. It's not about maximising the number of dollars in the world. The Bureau of Statistics is doing much better on measuring these sorts of things. It's got a social survey, the results of which came out frustratingly in the same week that Reconnected came out, showing that volunteering had dropped and that community membership had declined as well. But it's also about us as a community doing a better job of recognising those community entrepreneurs. We have Australian honours, which do this to some extent, but you'll notice a bit of a pattern there. The top honours tend to go to people who have been paid to have a high-level job in a high-prestige national organisation. The lowest class of honours tend to go to people who've been living a life of service to others, who've been just helping out in their local communities very quietly, often without a title to go along with it. I think that's one of the reasons why honours have tended to go disproportionately to blokes, despite the fact that we know very clearly that if you measure social capital in pretty much any organisation, women tend to be putting in more social capital than men. Women are more likely to be active in churches, in community organisations of all kinds. So we can do a smarter job of recognising the helpers in our community. We also need to be very, very careful that we don't at any point equate GDP to well-being.
So can I just round this off with, I don't know if this is, what do they call it? The devil's advocate. So this is all very lovely. People like Juliette, people doing, like Millie, doing great things in a system that for the last 50 years is becoming more and more concentrated to work for the wealthy. Businesses shifted from being a project to spread good to maximise shareholder value. Jobs are less secure. Politics is more nasty. And good people clean up the mess at the end of that really unfair and unsustainable transaction. Is it good enough that we have a system that says, good people, go and do your nice stuff for free, feel good about it? Andrew will keep putting out books about how this makes us feel connected while the system continues on its inexorable course. And isn't there a role in politics of shifting the system so that this is not necessarily the role of the state, but I guess the partnership between individuals and each other through their government shifts in a way that everything isn't going up the tree to those that already have it?
Peter, I'm passionate about social capital, but it's not the only thing I'm passionate about. And I certainly believe that we need to do a lot to turn inequality around. We haven't talked at all about last week's budget, but I can give you chapter and verse on ways in which I think last week's budget could have done more to narrow the gap between rich and poor. And as I said in the outset, I think that goes together. I think a more egalitarian society and a more communitarian society are both intertwined. There is certainly a tendency for Australia to have become less of a country of we and more of a country of me over recent years. Nick, Terrell and I would like to see that turned around. But it's not entirely in action for government either. Mindful use of technology as a parent, I find absolutely vital. When I look at some of the organisations which are enabling using the use of technology for social purpose, such as Juliette's work, such as the Couch Choir, which is crowdsourcing thousands of people to sing together and to get that high from singing in a COVID distanced environment. That's again another form of what Nick, Terrell and I call cyber connecting. So there's a lot for government to do, but there's a lot for us to do as individuals. And frankly, we're going to be happier as a result. We talk in Reconnected about a lovely experiment done in Chicago in which people approached commuters who were about to take a train trip and said, so do you reckon you'd be happier or sadder if you spent the train trip chatting to the person next to you rather than on your phone? And the typical person says, oh no, I think I'd be much less happy if I did that. And then they pay a random group of them to give them a small gift card in exchange for chatting to the person next to them. Then when they get off the train, they say, so how was that? And almost universally, the people report that the trip was much more fun when they engage with strangers. The resulting research paper was called Mistakenly Seeking Solitude.
Very nice. Any final thoughts on that, Juliette, just on the sort of connections you've made along the way as well?
I wanted to go back to Millie, if that's okay, Peter.
Yeah.
I think that it's devastating that they constantly do measure the economic impact of volunteering and try and measure it that way. I was wondering if we could start measuring it maybe out of 10, saying, you know, how connected do you feel to the community after you did that? Say if it's a good 10 out of 10, then that's the capital. That's fantastic. And how supported did the recipient feel out of 10? Like that would be something that I would want to read about instead of how many volunteer hours times 40 has that person contributed to the economy. So I also wanted to say it's really fascinating how Andrew and Nick have just gone right into the science of being connected, and I'm absolutely truly fascinated by this whole subject. I'm definitely not an expert. Even though I'm addicted to giving, I'm no way near an expert now, I realise.
Great. One final thing that you touched on in your book that I want to do as a bit of an add to my community before we sort of close off the discussion, guys, is the idea of deliberative democracy and giving people a real say in decisions. So we've created this little community that we get politicians and business leaders to come and share ideas with it. In a couple of weeks, we're going to actually be running this as a consultative town hall for Energy Consumers Australia, who are trying to come up with what an energy compact between producers and the community look like. So keep an eye out for your inbox. It's the first time we've done this, but the only reason we can actually offer this service is that you all keep turning up to these sorts of discussions. And so we're trying to, I guess, in a way, create extra energy and value out of the network we've created through Australia at Home. So I really look forward to seeing you all. That's in about 2 weeks' time. Obviously, we've got a whole bunch of our regular events coming up. We'll have the Tech Talk on Friday. We'll have the political Geek Fest next Tuesday. If anyone's seen The Social Dilemma, one of the guys from The Social Dilemma, Tim Kendall, is lined up to Zoom in a couple of weeks' time as well. So people are really reaching out to be part of this community, which I think creates a little bit of a model of how the internet can operate in a more productive way. I feel that when we do these events, we're all in the internet. We're all sort of sharing the space rather than just watching or sharing a meme or sending a snarky comment on Twitter. So it is a nice environment that we're all part of, and I just thank you all for continuing to turn up. And I guess on that kind of positive note, Andrew, like, give me a couple of ideas on how you think the next decade's going to go when you put out the third in your book, which I guess will be called Hyperconnected after Disconnected and Reconnected. What's the world going to look like if we get it right
Peter,
over the next decade?
For the opportunity to talk today, and also for your thought leadership on this. I mean, you've written very articulately about changes in Australian democracy, but then over the course of this year, you've also built this important community, which does remind us that politics isn't a spectator sport, that you make a terrible mistake if you think that engaging in politics is trading insults on social media. In fact, politics is about convincing someone who has a different view than you that they should share your view, and ideally ending up in a place which is different from the starting perspective of both of you. And you do that in spades, and we talk in Reconnected about the role of deliberative democracy to bring about this kind of democratic renewal. But we do think that a reconnected Australia will be a whole lot more fun to live. It won't just be more affluent, it won't just have lower crime rates, but it'll be a community in which we're taking more of a shared role in raising kids, a community in which our public spaces are richer, a community in which work will be more rewarding because you'll be looking for great ideas right across the community, and in which there will be a whole lot more Juliette Wrights, people who are there founding their innovative organisations, not turning away from technology, but using technology mindfully in order to build a more connected Australia. If there's one final tip that I'd leave people, it's if you're able to do so with COVID distancing requirements, think about putting on the street party for your neighbours this December. It is insanely easy to organise a street party. My wife and I have done it every year for at least the last decade. We just letterbox a small invitation. We ask people to pop over to our house at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. BYO ensures we don't have to cater for everyone, and the dividends of that street party pay off all the way through the year. So there's all kinds of ways of building connection, big like Juliette's GIVIT, and small like our street party.
Excellent. Hey, thank you both. Thank you all for your time and a really active chat today. I think we really unleashed our community. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Stay safe. Buy Andrew's book. You can Google it. And I put it, everyone's got it. There you go. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks a lot. We'll see you on Friday. Cheers.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Juliette.
Thanks, guys. That was fantastic.